Ever watch someone confidently explain something and you just know they're missing a key piece of the puzzle?
Oh, definitely. Or you've maybe been there yourself.
Totally.
Yeah.
You know, feeling on top of the world about some new skill, only to realize later, wow, I was way off base. That gap, right, between how good we think we are and how good we actually are.
Yeah.
That's what we're digging into today.
Exactly. We're doing a deep dive into the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
Okay, so the Dunning-Kruger effect. What is it exactly? Like the simple version.
Well, simply put, it's this tendency where people who aren't very skilled at something, they often think they're much better than they actually are.
Right. But there's that twist, isn't there? The flip side.
Yeah, that's the part that gets missed sometimes. Really competent people, the experts, they can sometimes underestimate their own abilities compared to others.
Interesting. So to really get into this, what sources are we looking at?
We've pulled from a few places. We've got academic perspectives from the Decision Lab and Wikipedia, for the research background.
Okay, the foundations.
Right. But then, to make it really concrete, we've also dived into Reddit. Specifically, Explain, Like, Kime 5, and Rask Reddit.
Ah, for the real-world examples. See how people actually talk about it.
Exactly. Get those layperson perspectives and anecdotes that show it in action.
So our goal here isn't just, like, defining it and moving on.
No, definitely not.
We want to unpack it,
Right.
Understand the different ideas about why it happens, how it's studied, and crucially, how it pops up in everyday life.
Yeah, basically giving you the shortcut to understanding this this really fundamental quirk in how we see ourselves.
Okay, let's get into the core definition then. We said low skill, high confidence. Kind of.
Yeah, that's the main bit. People with low ability in a specific area tend to overestimate that ability. And then high performers might underestimate theirs, relatively speaking.
And this isn't just a random guess, it's a bias, like a pattern.
Precisely. It's classed as a cognitive bias, so a systematic, predictable error in our thinking and judgment.
Gotcha. And you mentioned clearing things up. What are the common mix-ups?
Well, first off, it's not about general intelligence. That's a big one.
Right. So you can be brilliant at, say, math, but still think you're a great driver when you're not.
Exactly. It's skill-specific. You might overestimate your competence in that specific area, even if you're generally smart.
Okay, that makes sense. And the confidence thing, it's not like low performers are always super cocky, is it?
No, not necessarily bursting with confidence like a true expert might be. It's more that their self-assessment of their own level, which is objectively low, is still overly positive. Inflated,
Inflated relative to their actual lower score. Okay.
Right. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and there's some debate around this, but a key concept is metacognition.
Metacognition. Okay, break that down.
Metacognition. It's basically thinking about your own thinking, your ability to judge your own understanding or performance.
Ah, self-awareness.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And the dual burden idea suggests that being incompetent at something often comes with a second burden. You lack the very skills needed to recognize your incompetence.
Like, the skills you need to do the task are the same skills you need to judge if you did it well.
Exactly. Think about grammar. If your grammar is poor, you're probably not going to be very good at spotting grammar mistakes, including your own.
Right, okay. So the incompetence itself stops you from seeing the incompetence.
That's the core of the dual burden account. You don't know what you don't know, and that lack of knowledge hinders your ability to accurately judge yourself.
Which explains that quote from David Dunning.
Ah, yes. The first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club is you don't know you're a member of the Dunning-Kruger Club. Perfectly sums it up.
It really does. Okay, so if it's this tricky internal thing, how on earth do researchers actually measure it? How do they see that gap?
Well, the standard approach is pretty straightforward, conceptually at least. They compare subjective ability, what someone thinks their skill level is, with their objective performance.
So they give them a test or a task.
Yeah, could be anything. A logic puzzle, a grammar test, rating jokes for funniness. They do the task and then they rate themselves.
And when do they rate themselves? Before or after?
Usually either before or after, but the key is no feedback during the task.
Ah, so they can't adjust their self-rating based on seeing if they're getting things right or wrong.
Exactly. You want their raw self-perception untainted by immediate results. If it's a quiz, they don't find out their score until after they've estimated how well they think they did.
Okay. Keeps it clean.
Right. And researchers often distinguish between two types of self-assessment. There's absolute judging against a fixed standard, like how many questions did I get right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's relative, comparing yourself to others, like what percentile do I think I'm in compared to other participants?
And does the effect show up differently?
Yeah, interestingly, the Dunning-Kruger effect often appears stronger in those relative judgments. People seem to be worse at gauging how they stack up against peers than estimating their own raw score.
Huh. Okay, so that's the how.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned debates about the why. Beyond that metacognition thing, what else is going on?
Well, a really significant challenge to the metacognitive explanation comes from statistics.
Statistics. How does that fit in?
Some researchers argue that a large part of the Dunning-Kruger pattern might just be, well, a statistical artifact, specifically something called regression toward the mean.
Regression toward the mean.
Oh,
Okay, I've heard of that, but explain it simply.
sure. Think about any measurement with some randomness or error involved, like test scores. If someone gets an extremely high score, chances are their true ability is high, but maybe they also got a bit lucky. On the next test, they'll likely still score high, but probably a bit closer to the average.
Okay.
And the same happens at the bottom. Someone who scores extremely low might be less skilled, but maybe also had a bit of bad luck. Their next score is likely to be low, but probably a bit higher, closer to the average. Extreme scores tend to move towards the middle over time or across related measures.
So how does that explain Dunning-Kruger?
Well, if someone performs very poorly on a task that's an extreme low objective score, their self-assessment, which is imperfect, is statistically more likely to be closer to the average self-assessment, which means it's likely to be higher than their very low objective score.
Ah, so just by statistical chance, low performers' guesses about their skill are likely to overshoot their actual rock-bottom score.
Exactly. And high performers' guesses are more likely to undershoot their stellar score. Combine that statistical tendency with the general human tendency to be a bit optimistic, the better than average effect.
Where most people think they're above average.
Right. Put those two together, regression plus general optimism, and you can generate data patterns that look remarkably similar to the Dunning-Kruger effect without needing the metacognitive explanation.
Wow. So it could just be math and wishful thinking?
That's the argument from the statistical camp.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's debated.
What are the counter-arguments?
Critics say the pure statistical model might only really work for those relative better than peers judgments, not necessarily for absolute judgments against a standard. And others argue it just describes the pattern. It doesn't explain the underlying psychological mechanism, why are self-assessments noisy in the first place.
Okay, so it's not settled. What other psychological ideas are there?
There's something called the rational model. This suggests it's less about a lack of self-awareness and more about our prior beliefs.
Prior beliefs.
Yeah, like if you go into a task already believing you're pretty good at it, that strong prior belief can heavily influence how you interpret your performance, even if the evidence isn't great. Your initial optimism colors your final judgment.
So you expect to do well, and that sort of shades how you view the actual results.
Kind of, yeah. Your brain might anchor onto that initial belief. Then there's another idea focusing on the distribution of performers.
How does that work?
The argument goes, imagine a task where almost everyone who performs poorly performs equally poorly. There's a big cluster of people at the bottom with very similar low scores.
Okay.
In that situation, it becomes statistically very difficult for any individual within that low-performing group to accurately judge their relative standing. How do you know if you're slightly better or worse than others if everyone's basically got the same low score?
Right. It's hard to differentiate yourself.
Exactly. So the apparent overestimation might stem from the difficulty of making fine distinctions at the bottom end rather than an individual cognitive flaw. Though, again, this model is questioned because that specific skill distribution isn't always there when the effect is seen.
And wasn't there something about people maybe just not caring enough to be accurate in these studies?
Ah, yes, the lack of incentive idea. Maybe participants just aren't motivated. Perhaps they want to look good, or they just don't put much effort into the self-assessment.
To be? Did they test that?
They did. Some studies offered monetary rewards for more accurate self-assessments.
Did it help?
Not really, no. Accuracy didn't improve significantly, which suggests that simply not trying hard enough probably isn't the main driver behind the effect.
Huh. So it really seems like a complex picture.
Yeah.
Lots of different factors might be playing a role.
Absolutely. It's likely not just one single thing, but an interplay of metacognitive limits, statistical effects, maybe some motivational factors.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
But whatever the exact mix of causes, The end result, that mismatch between perceived and actual skill that definitely has real-world consequences.
Oh, for sure. And that's where the Reddit examples really bring it to life.
Yeah, let's get into those. What were some standouts? You mentioned boats.
Yeah, the person working on boats, seeing owners argue about repairs, absolutely convinced they know best, despite, visible rot or clear mechanical issues. They just don't have the training to diagnose.
Oh, I can picture that. It reminds me of that story about the AC repair guy. The homeowner was insistent a part couldn't fail because it had just been checked, refusing to believe the expert.
Exactly that I know better vibe.
Yeah.
We saw it with family members, too. Someone's dad thinking he was a stock market wizard after a couple of lucky picks, ignoring the losses piling up. Total lack of understanding of risk or strategy.
Right. Or the tech examples.
Yeah.
The story about the uncle and cousin, actual IT pros, apparently refusing to peel the plastic off a new laptop webcam because they were sure it was meant to stay.
Yes. It's that level of certainty about something simple but wrong, like the person returning a camera because the battery was in backwards. Admitting the simple error seems impossible sometimes.
It really does. It's not always complex stuff either.
No. And it's not just technical skills. There was that Reddit comment about a high school singer.
Oh, yeah. Thought they were amazing.
Until they got to music school and were surrounded by actual talent and realized, oh, I have a lot to learn.
That's almost the Dunning-Kruger journey in reverse, right?
Yeah.
Moving off that initial peak of overconfidence.
The descent from Mount Stupid, as it's sometimes called. Exactly. Then you had the construction boss example, demanding impossible timelines, totally out of touch with the actual work involved. That overconfidence can wreck projects, stress people out.
Definitely. And people arguing confidently about things they fundamentally misunderstand, like how progressive tax brackets work.
Oh, yeah, that came up. People thinking their whole income gets taxed at the highest rate they hit.
Or the person's certain the Old and New Testaments were the same book. The sheer confidence in factual errors is wild.
It really is. And some examples were, frankly, a bit concerning.
Like the Child Protective Services one.
Yeah, parents having lost custody but still insisting they know parenting and are excellent at it. A profound lack of self-awareness in a really high-stakes situation.
Or the person convinced aspartame causes brain cancer, despite all the science. That willful dismissal of evidence fueled by confidence.
Absolutely. It touches on how this effect can contribute to holding on to misinformation or harmful beliefs. The examples ranged so widely, too.
Like denying Finland exists. That one was out there.
Right. Almost comical. But then you have more serious ones, like climate deniers dismissing scientists who've spent their lives studying the topic.
It's that dismissal of expertise because you feel you understand it well enough.
Exactly. Even the funny ones, like arguing Supergirl's uterus couldn't possibly be steel. It shows a confidence overriding basic logic, even in fiction.
And the tattoo apprentice story, experienced artists being lax with biohazard and safety, dismissing the newcomer's valid concerns. Overconfidence leading to potentially dangerous complacency.
That's a great example. And we saw the theme again and again. Customers arguing with IT, convinced they know the system better.
Or the aspiring entrepreneur with a business plan built on, well, unrealistic dreams and overconfidence about market demand.
Right. Even simple consumer choices, like the person obsessed with megapixels on a phone camera, ignoring everything else that makes a good photo. Lens quality, sensor size, software.
It's that little bit of knowledge leading to misplaced confidence.
Precisely. It all just underscores how this bias can lead to poor decisions, whether it's career choices, health beliefs, financial planning, or just buying the wrong tech.
No wonder they got that Ig Nobel Prize. It's darkly funny, but also deeply relevant.
Yeah, it recognizes something real and widespread, and it connects to those related ideas, illusory superiority, the general overconfidence effect, and the need for intellectual humility.
Okay, so if this is potentially lurking in all of us, what do we do? How do we avoid being stuck on that Mount Stupid?
Well, interestingly, the Reddit threads themselves offered some good paths forward. A big one was continuous learning.
Just keep learning.
Yeah, the very act of learning more about a subject often reveals its complexity. You start to realize how much you don't know. That initial peak of confidence often comes when you've learned just enough to feel competent, but not enough to see the vast landscape of what's still unknown.
So knowledge itself can be the antidote. The more you learn, the more humble you become about what you know.
Often, yes. True experts frequently talk about how much more there is to learn in their field. They acknowledge the boundaries of their knowledge. It's often the novice or intermediate person who feels they've got it all figured out.
That makes sense. You climb down from that initial peak as you appreciate the true scale of the mountain.
Exactly. You might even dip into that valley of despair for a bit, where you feel overwhelmed by how much you don't know, before your confidence starts to rebuild on a more solid foundation of actual competence.
So perseverance through learning is key. What else came up?
Seeking out and listening to objective feedback, especially from people who genuinely know the subject.
Right. Don't just rely on your own internal gauge.
Absolutely. Be wary of people, including yourself, who never seem to admit mistakes, never talk about challenges, or never mention what they still need to figure out. That can be a red flag.
So cultivate intellectual humility. Be open to being wrong.
That's a huge part of it. Actively solicit criticism. Try to see things from the perspective of those with proven expertise. It's about developing that metacognitive skill, the ability to realistically assess your own understanding.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up then, the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
It's this really interesting disconnect between how good we think we are and how good we actually are.
Right.
Especially at lower skill levels.
Right. And while scientists debate the exact why, is it purely not knowing what you don't know? Is it statistical noise? Is it prior beliefs? The effect itself seems pretty robust and shows up everywhere.
The Reddit examples made that crystal clear.
Definitely. And the main takeaway for all of us, really, is the power of self-awareness and just committing to being a lifelong learner.
Keep questioning, keep learning, seek feedback.
Exactly. That's how you guard against that overconfidence trap.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener. Think back. Can you recall a time when you were supremely confident about something, maybe a skill or a topic, only to realize later, maybe after learning more or getting some tough feedback, that you were, well, pretty ignorant back then?
That descent from Mount Stupid moment?
Yeah. What did that experience teach you? It can be humbling, for sure, but maybe also incredibly valuable for growth. Something to reflect on. Where might your own blind spots be now, and how valuable is that dose of intellectual humility?